Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, comrades and friends, today we're going to be talking about grade inflation in the United States. Just giving a general food for thought conversation here. Just discussing this issue in terms of some of its potential positives, some of its potential negatives, as well as what I would do if I was running the world here. Would grade inflation be a thing? How do I feel about it? It's a parasitic practice. But we'll get into all that here in a second. But before we begin, what is grade inflation? Well, grade inflation is the idea that you inflate kids' grades to actually have less predictive validity for the state test, or just to make them feel better about themselves, right? Which would be one of the quote-unquote positives of grade inflation. So let me give you an example here. Let's say you got a 50%. It's like, well, if I just grade super easy and ignore a lot of the shortcomings of our students, right, then I can maybe bump that grade up to 75%. Now I can bump it. Now they got a C instead of an F. It's like, do they really understand the content, though, to be proficient? Right? If you test them if they get tested by the state during the state examinations, it's like, well, no, because the state examination does not care how kids feel. All it cares about is what their performance is at. What is the true understanding of the content material? And that's part of the reasons we have standards, and that's part of the reason why you have an 800-page diagnostic manual concerning the validity and reliability of the state examinations. These things are grounded in data, and you're not using data by simply making people feel good about their grades. And look, I think there's a difference, a big distinction between giving a kid another percent or two versus just bumping them up artificially because you want to grade super easy, or you want to test them on material that's grade levels below what they should actually be learning in terms of the grade level. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. There's a distinction there, and I made a video on rounding that you can watch, and I'll link it here after the video. You'll see it pop up. But look, I don't necessarily see anything wrong if a student really tried and they had good behavior to bump them up a couple percent. But if we're talking to bump them up 30-40% now, which is what is happening in a lot of schools, and I've seen it. I've seen this happen before, where you can even have cases where schools will bump students up from even something like a 0% to an automatic 50%. Right, which is the policy in my school district, and I've always vehemently disagreed with that. And look, it's still not like you're bumping them up to an A or whatever. Nobody will get on your case to inflate grades beyond that 50%. But the fact of the matter is, at the end of the quarter, I got to at least change the number to that 50%. Now, maybe their actual grade is their actual grade. It's but that is a weird thing in my opinion. And in addition to that, though, the grade inflation is not necessarily just changing the number, right? So when I'm mentioning grade inflation, in 99% of cases, it just is teachers naturally doing this. And now, are they doing this because they have some malicious intent, or they have some ideological agenda where they think that grade inflation is going to be a great thing? It's most of the time, no, that's not the case. Grade inflation may be proposed by higher ups and administrators, but most people they're not really compelled to do so. Some people are compelled to do so, but most of the time it's unconscious, and so these teachers just grade super easy, and the way in which they're grading is not really representative of what the students are going to learn on the state test. And that is very evident, because when you look at the state test, it's little Jimmy, who got a D, is now getting is now limited performance in terms of their proficiency ranking, right? So it doesn't really make much sense. And so another thing too is I'll mention is, I remember when I was at the charter world, we used to do benchmark assessments all the time, and these were every 2 weeks. We would track performance index scores of students based on these little assessments that we would create as teachers, and they had to be approved just for grammatical accuracy. And when I say grammatical accuracy, I literally just mean grammar and the structure of the question, not the question itself in terms of the content material, right? So you could have a math question that was for 7th grade, but the kids are getting a 2+2 question, for instance, right? Now that would be an extreme example, and that probably wouldn't happen. But you can see where I'm coming from here. It's it wasn't the content, it was just the grammar, and that's important here, right? So when we would give out these tests, we would essentially just be creating these questions ourselves. And I remember when I was tracking my data, we would have to send it on into the director of academics. I remember we had this one meeting with everybody, and it was this big little professional development meeting for the whole school. And, there wasn't, I mean, the school wasn't that big. It was only like 20 people at most, probably less than, probably 15. And we were all in there, whatever. And I remember they were saying, well, look, Mr. Phillips, is like, your scores are very low compared to everybody else. It's like, what can we do to try to, help Phillips? It's like, what can we do to make sure that his scores are going to improve, right? And I'm sitting back at this and I'm thinking, like, what the hell are you talking about? I mean, and yeah, I know maybe it's blunt to say that, right? But, my grades, my state examination was predicted perfectly. That score was predicted perfectly by my benchmark assessments the first year I was a teacher there. And I had the second highest in the entire school. And I think it was a 55 performance index, right? And then my second year, I had a 69 performance index score, which was the highest in my school, and outperforming the public schools, the whole 9 yards, everybody. Like, I really, really killed it, right? And, so the other teachers are offering advice, right? But because their performance index scores that they track themselves with their little benchmark assessments were like 105, right? Or like 110 or like 90, right? Something extremely insanely high. And so then you look at my little score, which is like literally predicted my state examination perfectly, by the way, within a couple performance index points, both years, right? So they were extremely valid in the way in which they were constructed. Because again, like, if you just follow the standards and you don't do any fluff, nothing, it's like that would be a very good indication of exactly what students need to know on the state test and how they're going to perform. And so you just test them on those type of questions with the right structure, and boom, you get a performance index score that's actually valid. Now, I'd have like a, maybe say 50 something or like a 60 something for mine, and then everybody else would have these super high scores. It's like, well, when it came time to take the state test, they get like 30 performance index score, or like a 40 at most, right? Or like a 35, right? It's like they're bombing their state test. And you could say, well, is that, really teaching the kids had anxiety? It's like, man, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, your tests just weren't right. It was predicting it the entire time. You just don't know how to look at the data, because your test questions don't measure anything, right? So therefore you have no data, and because you don't know how to collect any. And so imagine this, right? If you made your test perfectly, it would have predicted where your students were going to perform. But since it was terrible validity, it over predicted how your students were going to perform. So it predicted them to perform super high. And that's a huge problem. And that's a problem that a lot of people are facing. And then those little benchmark assessments would most times be part of people's grades to try to motivate them to take those assessments. But that would really bump up their grades. So then what happens is little Jimmy gets an A+ in class. He goes to take the state test, and he gets a basic or a limited score, and everybody's like, wow, I can't believe that they did so bad on the state test. It's like they had an A+ all year. They were really understanding. It's like, no, they weren't, because you grade so easily, and you're not really teaching the right material. And that's a bigger issue, is maybe not teaching the right material, but like you're just too easy, right? You got to make this difficult, and you got to imagine yourself being like an evil state test grader who hates kids, because like that's like when you're doing this data anyways, maybe not all the time, right? Don't act like that all the time, but like when you're doing these benchmark assessments, like you got to act like that, because if you don't, you're not going to get the proper data, and without the proper data, you can't make data-driven decisions, which will allow you to positively impact your students the most in the most reliable manner. So look, grade inflation, I think it can certainly be a negative thing. Now, what would be the motivation behind this? It's like, well, let's say it motivates students, right? Because if a student now has a C, they're going to feel good about themselves in class, and they're going to want to be there and learn. It's like, no, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that at all, actually. In most cases, I imagine the students with those higher grades that were unjustly awarded, again, remember, they're messing around, they're on their phone, blah, 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 blah. What is the incentive for them to then perform good the next quarter and improve? It's like, they already got a C. It's like they don't get yelled at if they get a C. Life's pretty good for them if they have a C. It's like, what's the incentive to improve? It's like a lot of people just become content. Now, not everybody, right? But like in a lot of cases, that's going to be the case. So if you're just getting bumped up from like an F to a C or something, it's like, yeah, you might feel a little bit better, and you might like the teacher more, which is the only other benefit, because the teacher will probably have an easier time in the class. And this is where I first discovered the Reddit post. It's like, look, teachers, the kids are going to like the teachers more because they don't want to do the work. And so, look, would you rather do work and maybe have to not get a bad, maybe not even get a good grade, or would you rather have to do no work and get a good grade, right? It's kind of like, again, it's like the lottery, right? Imagine this: you have one dollar ticket, you purchase it, and all of a sudden you're worth $100 million. People are going to be very excited at that $100 million, right? Nobody's really going to turn that down, and everybody's going to be super stoked about it. I can't imagine anybody would be upset that they won the lottery. You would be happy because you put in no effort and you just got $100 million, which would have been extremely difficult otherwise. And so, look, it's the same thing. And that's why people feel like they won the lottery when they get a teacher that they know is easy. And it's for that reason. And so, look, it's not necessarily how much the student has learned by the teacher. It's about how the teacher maybe makes them feel in that moment. But, if we're just focused on learning and just focused on performance and just focused on bringing them these positive experiences that they can reminisce on later on in life, then you actually have to do some more rigorous work and prepare your students in a manner that will impact them positively when they get to the workforce, because it's not all sunshines and rainbows there. Look, you're not performing. It's like you're going to have a very rude awakening. And so it's like, don't congratulate them necessarily with these super high grades that are inflated when they're just going to get shunned out of the workforce, and because they'll get fired or they'll get reprimands or things will just go very bad for them. Like, imagine that you're late every single day in class, and you barely tried, you're on your phone, and you're still passing with like a C, and you don't do homework, and you just sort of skirting by. It's like, yeah, those people exist in the workforce. It's like, but they get fired pretty quickly, and they got to hop from job to job. They have little stability, and they're just certainly not going to be in a position of power in most cases. Now, obviously, there's exceptions to every rule, but generally speaking, I'm guaranteed there's a correlation that they're not going to have as good of a time. And look, that translates to the workforce. Like, what, are you going to be on your phone and not do work half the day and think that you're going to somehow get rewarded for that? It's like, here's your reward. You're fired. Right? Go find a different job. Pack your bags. Leave, right? So that's the way that it is, and it's harsh, and it sucks to have to say, but that is the case. Now, what might be some of the reason, another reason that teachers might do this, again, it's to keep people off of their backs. The administration in a lot of places might be at their throats to inflate the grades, or they'll just be on them like, why are so many kids failing? Right? Isn't it the teacher's responsibility to make everybody pass? Yada, yada, yada. It's like, no. It's like, first of all, they're not passing the state test, so why would they pass my class? Right? Yeah, especially if your tests are very valid, too. And it might take some time to prove that, because you have to actually track the data beforehand and then show your state testing results. But it's like, yeah, I mean, that's a big consideration in my opinion. If they're not passing the state test, why on earth would they pass your class? And so you could say the same thing about, like, if they're not passing my mock assessments, why would they pass my class? Because it's like, look, you got a kid at like limited performance. It's like they shouldn't be thrown up to like accelerated in terms of their grade, which might be like a B, for instance, right, in class. It just doesn't make any sense. And so if you really want to accurately track things, then you might have to be willing to risk the idea that administration might be on your back. And again, that's not everywhere, but that is at a lot of places, and it's unfortunate. That's very unfortunate. Additionally, I think that I think that's it. So it keeps people off of your back, and a lot of people find that very, very appealing. And more power to them, I suppose. It's certainly not going to harm your career as a teacher. It may be a good thing because maybe it keeps them off your back. But at the end of the day, for the students, I don't really think it's that beneficial. Now, a lot of schools nowadays are making it so that way students have minimum grades no matter where they're at. Like in our district, for instance, we have kids who can have a 0%, they'll get bumped up to an automatic 50. And you're just changing the number. You're not changing the letter grade. But that is still, like, to me, that's like wild. I can't believe that's the thing. And so this is a real issue. And teachers are in a situation where sometimes they don't have the ability to make this decision for themselves. And I think that's wrong. I would like to see a situation where grades weren't inflated all around. But at the end of the day, it is the teacher's choice, and I think that they should be allowed to. I think that they should be allowed to make that decision, because it's like sometimes like you can assess that data yourself to know whether or not there needs to be an adjustment. And so, for instance, let's say that you're talking about rounding grades, right? Let's say you want to round your grade up a couple percent, right? Well, that's technically grade inflation. And so, like, I think that teachers should be allowed to, and they should retain that power. And I got a whole other video on rounding grades that I just made. And it's one of those things where it's like, look, you've done your work, you've really tried, you're well behaved. It's like, yeah, I'll round your grade up a little bit, I'll inflate your grade higher than it actually is in terms of your understanding. But you've earned that, right? And so I think there is a thing for effort here, but then you can't just reward anybody for not showing that effort, You know what I mean? And so it's a very interesting fine balance there. But teachers probably should have autonomy on this, at least to some degree. Maybe administrators do to another, in the sense that, like, look, they should probably ban really high grade inflation or work with those who are really inflating the grades super high. Because that's one of the things that it's always really bothered me. I know it bothers a lot of other people. And like, even with this little post here that happens to be in the background, it says probably half our teachers give 80+% of their classes A's. Our chemistry department doesn't have a single student with a D or an F. Not one. It's chemistry. Have they met our students? You're telling me Jeff over here, who is glued to his phone every second of class and never read a chapter or book in his life, is passing chemistry? So you're telling me Miranda, who has 48 absences this year, is passing chemistry? It's like, yeah, I mean, that's exactly the problem that we're running into, and it's not preparing students for the real world. And it's unfortunate, because it's like, yeah, they might feel it might be all well now. It's like, but they need this wake up call before they get to the job market, and things are pretty rough for them. And this, now they have an opportunity to correct themselves and change their behaviors. But when they become an adult, like, yeah, they'll still have opportunities to change themselves and correct their behaviors. It's like, but it'll be much more of a rude awakening than it was before. And I don't think that that's right. So yeah, I don't know. Like, let me know what you guys think on this issue. You can clearly tell where I'm at. I think it's a parasitic practice. I don't think that grade inflation should be a thing. Some people will do it consciously. Some people do it unconsciously, which is like the people who just naturally want to inflate those grades. Some people are just told to, and they have to do it. They have no choice. And it's like, hey, look, man, I guess you have to at the end of the day, and sort of judge your own situation. And obviously, before any policies should be made, I always recommend that people look into these issues a little bit farther. I wouldn't recommend that these issues be totally taken based on my word today. But I think it's a good starting point, some good food for thought. And you can sort of tell where I lean on the issue. And yeah, if you guys want to watch the other video, though, will be put here at the end of the video. And in addition to that, you can follow me on social media at Ian Phillips USA for some more content. And please subscribe. It would be very awesome if you did. I'm trying to get out a video every single day if I can. That would be my ultimate goal. But obviously, it can be kind of difficult to do that some days. But trying our best to do so, and talk about some of these issues facing education. So it's an open discussion here. Feel free to tell me in the comments what you think, and we'll go from there. I'll respond to you. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and you have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.